Hi everyone, welcome back to InfoSec Train. My name is Divyani and today we have Mr. Krish with us. He's an AWS expert and a trainer at InfoSec Train. Hi Krish, how are you doing?
Hey Devyani, hi. Good evening. I'm perfectly fine. Great.
Good evening. So AWS is the leader in the cloud market and it started the public cloud journey. The main challenge faced by the candidate is cracking an interview for various profiles in AWS. So today we have Mr. Krish with us to answer some questions asked in an AWS interview.
Perfect.
Okay, so my first question is, Krish, would you like to tell something about AWS IAM service, like what basically is it?
So the AWS IAM, which stands for the AWS Identity and Access Management, it's actually one of them. Before I talk about the AWS IAM, I'll first of all tell you the concept of IAM, which stands for Identity and Access Management. When you go to any cloud computing provider or any kind of IT infrastructure, having a proper user authentication and permissions is very important to this. So for providing the permission to the AWS cloud platform for various services and all these things is what we call as a AWS IAM. This service, we call as a AWS IAM, provides you a fine-grained access control to various AWS services and resources, and you can define multiple user accounts, you can create permissions for them, like you can do a lot of things for this authentication authorization using this AWS IAM.
Okay, and talking about authentication and authorization, what is the difference between both of them?
So when you say authentication, like let's say I'm a person. So for a person to access something, like if you want to send an email or if you want to log into a cloud platform or if you want to use your mobile phone or whatever it is, you need to have something called as an identity. Identity is a mandatory, right? So to verify the identity is what we call as authentication. Like for example, now there is a person called Krish who want to log into something. So Krish need to have an identity, like we create a username and password, right? So the username is basically a name for that person. So basically what happens, I enter my username and password and it must be verified, or my credentials must be verified, and then only I allow the access, right? So that is what we call as authentication. Process of verifying an identity is what we call as authentication. Okay, now once I done the authentication and my identity is verified, the next step is that I have to define the level of access. See, like for example, we both are working in the same company. You are a different job role. I'm in a different job role. So basically, for both of us, we don't have to get complete permission to everything in this company, right? Because end of the day, we have to get exactly the permission for what we are doing. Like for example, for Krish, he must get permission to what exactly he needs in the company in that minimum level. Like for Devyani, it's the same. Like she also has to get some permissions, which is specifically for her job role, right? So that is what we call as authorization. Defining the level of access, defining the level of permissions or access is what we call as a authorization. That's it.
Okay, and what is that we call as a root account in AWS?
So now you're aware of how to create an AWS account, right? When you basically want to create an AWS account, what you do, like you have to go to the aws.amazon.com and you will click on create an account. So once you create an account, you will be asked to enter a username, like you will be asked to enter your email address and you have to enter a password. That first username and password you create in AWS is what we call as a root account. Like for example, let's say if I am having an AWS account and the primary email address and password I give for my AWS account is what we call as a root account, and that is a user who is having the 100% complete permission to AWS. Like for example, if Krish is having an AWS account and basically if he is having a username and router username and password, that username and password can be used for every activities in that AWS account.
Okay. So is it the same level of permissions we have for other IAM users as well?
No, never. Because when you go for the other IAM users, we create them for various purposes. Like for every users in our company, we have to create different IAM user profiles, and for every users or every person or every devices, we can have a separate username and password, or we can have a separate credentials like that. So for them, we have to define the custom level of permission. Like by default, whenever you create a user account, he is having something called as a zero permission. There is no permission for a user when we create him. So basically what we have to do, we have to create something called as a policy, or basically we have to use a policy to attach it to the user, and then only the user will get the permission which we give in the policy. That's it. By default, the user is not having any permission. We call it as deny by default. That means the user is denied for everything in AWS by default. We will give a separate level of permission, and using that we will be able to specifically decide which user want to get what permission. That's it.
Okay. This is a very basic question of IAM, I think. So what is an IAM policy?
So that's a very simple question. Like, as we discussed before, for a user, if he want to do something, there is a concept called as roles also, which we'll discuss in the next lectures. But still, there's a concept called as user. So for a user to do something, we have to attach a policy, right? That's what we discussed in the previous question. So that policy which we are attaching to a user is what we call as a IAM policy. Okay. And this policy is actually a JSON document. If you search in Google, you can find a lot of templates on that. It's a JSON document, JavaScript object notation document. So we can write a JSON policy by ourselves, or we can use the predefined or pre-existing policies in the AWS account. By having these policies, we can give permission to the users or groups. Like now, there is a user called as Devyani. I can create a IAM policy there, which defines a particular level of permission and attach it to your user account, and you will get the permission which I have given in the policy. That's it.
Okay. So guys, if you want to know more about IAM, stay tuned. We'll come up with more interview questions on this topic. Till then, bye-bye.